Sometimes the difference between life and death isn't medicine, it's compassion. Tonight, you'll witness the true story of a boy who was denied the right to breathe, and how one father's fight for his child became a turning point for millions. If you believe that stories have the power to spark change, make sure to subscribe, because here, every voice, every struggle, and every act of courage matters. The emergency room that night blazed with the harsh, sterile light only hospitals. Seeing to know. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting everything in a kind of merciless clarity, every wrinkle of exhaustion on the waiting faces, every flicker of pain, every ounce of prejudice simmering in the staff who had long stopped. Seeing patients as people, 15-year-old Ethan Carter never thought he'd be the center of it all. He just wanted a normal afternoon at the park with his friends, laughter in the cold air, the sweet smell of a cookie bought from a street vendor. But hidden inside that sweetness was his enemy, a peanut, within minutes of biting down his throat. Cinched tight as if an invisible rope had closed around his neck. His skin blotched with angry hives, his lips tinged blue. "He's allergic," someone screamed. And then everything blurred into chaos. The shriek of ambulance sirens, his friends' shaking hands gripping him tight, hot tears hitting his cheek as they whispered desperate prayers. When the outer doors slammed open, everyone thought Ethan was safe. But life doesn't always end from a lack of medicine. Sometimes, it ends in the cold grip of prejudice. Linda, the nurse on duty, walked in with the detached air of someone who had seen it all. The tap of her white shoes on the tiled floor echoed like gunshots. She looked at Ethan, not at his wheezing chest, not at his trembling fingers, but at his worn-out hoodie and scuffed sneakers. To her, he didn't look like a patient in crisis. He looked like trouble. "No insurance?" she sneered. "Then this isn't the place to beg for freebies." One of Ethan's friends nearly shouted in her face. "He's having a peanut allergy attack. He needs epinephrine right now or he's gonna die." Linda's eyes narrowed, full of suspicion. Ethan clawed at the bracelet on his wrist, a medical ID engraved with his condition. He raised it toward her with shaking fingers, the last shred of strength he had left. She laughed. "Fake jewelry. I've seen it all before." That cold smile, that single decision, the refusal to see, was enough to kill. Ethan collapsed into a chair, breath rattling out of him in short, jagged bursts. His friends panicked, fumbling with their phones, one calling for backup, another hitting record. Because deep down they knew, if no one filmed this, no one would believe it. The boy's voice cracked like dry wood as he whispered, "Please, I need help." Linda folded her arms. "'Cause one more scene and security will escort you all out." The waiting room buzzed with whispers. An older man, silver hair, small frame, eyes still bright, rose from his seat. "That boy's in anaphylactic shock. He won't last without that injection." Linda snapped her head toward him, her voice dripping disdain. "And you are?" "I practiced medicine for 40 years. I know what I'm looking at. Retired doctors don't run this AA. I do. And I say he's faking." Murmurs grew louder. A young woman lifted her phone, live streaming, her voice trembling but determined. "People need to see this. They're letting a kid die in front of us. #let him breathe." The viewer count began ticking upward, hundreds, then thousands. But inside that freezing room, Ethan was still suffocating. Death inching closer with every second. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket. One of his friends snatched it, put the call on speaker. "Ethan? Where are you?" The voice was deep, steady, commanding. It was Daniel Carter, his father. To many in the medical world, that name was legend. Director of Central Hospital, a man known for his stern discipline and relentless fight for patient rights. But Linda didn't know. Or didn't care. The boy croaked into the phone, barely audible. "Dad, they won't let me." Daniel's voice transformed instantly. Gentle warmth giving way to steel. This is Dr. Daniel Carter. Who's in charge of the AO right now? Linda stiffened but tried to sound professional. I am, sir. And with all due respect, we're following protocol. What protocol allows you to deny life-saving emergency care? You're violating EMTALA. That's federal law, not a suggestion. The name of the law dropped like a hammer. People in the waiting room whispered. Phone cameras tilted higher. Comments flooded the live stream. Linda swallowed hard but dug her heels in. You can't order me around through a phone, sir. Daniel's reply was colder than ice. Not through a phone. I'm in the building next door. 5 minutes away. If my son dies on your watch, it won't just be your license. It'll be this entire hospital's reputation. The room froze. Ethan slumped further, breath-wheezing into silence. His friend sobbed, one shaking Linda's arm, begging, "Please. If you're human at all, save him." Linda's hands trembled. Pride, fear, and stubbornness clashed inside her. But she still clutched the EpiPen like contraband. Then the doors flew open again. Daniel Carter stormed in, lab coat slung across. His broad shoulders, name badge glinting under the fluorescent light. Tall, steady, eyes burning with fury, he was a force of nature. The waiting room went silent, like the air before a storm. He strode straight to his son, knelt, gripped the cold hand. "Son, I'm here." Ethan's eyes flickered open, lips trembling, but no words came. Daniel looked up, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Hand me the EpiPen, now." Linda froze, her fingers shaking. Under the crushing weight of dozens of eyes and recording cameras, she finally surrendered it. Daniel injected with practiced precision, the steady hands of a man who had saved thousands. Seconds later, Ethan sucked in a ragged breath, his chest rising again, color slowly creeping back into his cheeks. A violent cough, then another, and then life. The crowd exhaled as one. Some wept. Applause broke out, raw, relieved, furious applause. Daniel rose, eyes still locked on Linda. "You refused to save a dying child. You disgraced the very oath this hospital stands for. Effective immediately, you're suspended. And the nursing board will hear about this." Linda's face drained of color. Her voice cracked. I was just following." "No." His words sliced clean through. "You weren't following protocol. You were following prejudice. And it almost killed my son." Phones shook as live streams went wild. The hashtag "Let Him Breathe" exploded online, viewership climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Ethan sat there, weak but breathing, clutching his father's hand as if it were the only anchor in the world. And in a way, it was. Because in that sterile waiting room, with cameras rolling and a boy's life nearly stolen by indifference, a fire had been lit. A fire that wouldn't just end a career. It would ignite a reckoning. The moment Ethan's chest rose again with that desperate gasp, the room seemed to breathe with him. Relief swept over the crowd like a wave. People cried, some clapped, some simply sat in stunned silence, their phones still raised but trembling. It should have ended there, with a boy saved, a father's love proven, a lesson learned. But silence is never just silence. It's the pause before thunder. Linda stood frozen, her white shoes anchored to the tile as if she'd been cemented in place. Her face had drained of all color, her hands limp at her sides. The EpiPen that had nearly become a death sentence was gone from her grip, but the imprint of her choices lingered heavy in the air. For 12 years she had worn the scrubs, followed shift schedules, barked orders, and told herself she was keeping order in the chaos. But tonight, this moment, she was no nurse. She was the villain in everyone's camera roll. Daniel Carter rose slowly, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve with a precision that made the whole room feel colder. His son still wheezed beside him, pale but alive, fingers clutching the hem of Daniel's coat as if he knew that fabric was the line between him and death. The live streamers held their breath, recording every flick of Daniel's gaze. One woman whispered, "He's not just a doctor, is he?" Her comments scrolled across the live stream like wildfire. "That's Dr. Carter. He runs Central Hospital." Linda finally found her voice, brittle and defensive. I was following protocol. Without proof of prescription, I couldn't risk." Daniel cut her off with a look that made her mouth snap shut like a trap. His voice carried no shout, but it struck harder than any scream. "You risked my son's life because of a hoodie, because of sneakers, because you decided what kind of child deserves to live." Her lips trembled. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." The words were quiet, but they slapped harder than thunder. Room erupted. Someone shouted, "We saw everything." Another cried out, "She needs to be fired." Phones tilted closer, catching every angle of her humiliation. Linda wrapped her arms around herself as if she could shrink into her uniform. But there was no shrinking away from a million eyes. Daniel turned from her, kneeling back at Ethan's side. "Keep breathing, son. You're safe." His hand brushed back the damp curls from his boy's forehead, his face softening in that private moment of fatherhood even as the world watched. Ethan coughed weakly, but nodded. He was still there, still alive, and that was when the first police officer stepped into the EO waiting room. Not here for a crime, but summoned by protocol when livestream viewership spiked past 100,000. And security radios began crackling with urgent codes. The hospital's PR officer rushed in too, face flushed, phone buzzing nonstop. They saw Daniel Carter standing tall, his son recovering, and Linda shrinking. "This is out of control," the PR officer whispered. "No," Daniel replied, rising to his full height. "This is accountability. And it's only the beginning." Linda stumbled back a step. The cameras followed her, hungry for every flicker of fear. She had walked into this night just another nurse. She would walk out a name etched into infamy. But for now, the waiting room was silent, no one daring to break the spell of Daniel's authority. Silence before the storm. Silence before the flood of headlines. Silence before a life, a career, and maybe an entire hospital would be torn open for the world to see. At first, it was just a ripple. A handful of comments scrolled across the livestream. Words flickering in real time. "What's happening? Is that kid okay? WTF, this nurse is insane." A dozen, then 100, then thousands. By the time Ethan coughed his first clear breath, the ripple had become a tide. "Dad, the stream's blowing up," whispered one of Ethan's friends, eyes glued to her phone. Her voice shook, caught between relief and awe. "We're at 60,000 viewers." Another gasp. "No 90, it just jumped." In the corner of the room, the young woman who had started the livestream, her username floating across the bottom corner, at Truth Teller Jen, was trembling. Not out of fear, but adrenaline. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. The comments racing too fast to read. "Let him breathe" had started as a desperate plea in her caption. Now it was climbing the trending board like wildfire licking up dry grass. Linda saw it too. Her eyes flicked from screen to screen, realizing with dawning horror that her face, her words, "Fake jewelry. I know a faker when I see one," were already being replayed and clipped into memes. Every roll of her eyes, every sneer, every ounce of prejudice was immortalized. She whispered, almost to herself, "Oh God." But there was no God in the comments. Only judgment. She should lose her license. This is attempted murder. That boy's dad is Dr. Carter. She's done. One comment scrolled so fast it froze Jun's phone for a beat. CNN just picked this up. It was no longer just a live stream. It was a national scandal in real time. Daniel noticed the shift. He didn't need a phone to know when the tide of public outrage had turned into a tsunami. He had lived long enough in the world of politics and medicine to recognize momentum when it roared. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, steadying him. Then he stood, his voice measured, clear, and deliberate. Not just for the room, but for the cameras. My son almost died tonight. Not because there wasn't medicine. Not because we lacked the skill to save him. But because someone in this very hospital looked at him and decided his life wasn't worth saving. The waiting room was silent. Phones captured every word. Somewhere far beyond those walls, anchors were already quoting him on live television. Daniel's gaze swept across the crowd, pausing deliberately on Linda, whose face was now ashen, her eyes brimming with tears she couldn't release. Medicine without compassion isn't medicine. It's cruelty, and cruelty has no place in a hospital. The comments exploded. Yes, preach, doctor. Hero. This is bigger than one nurse. This is systemic. In that instant, Daniel Carter wasn't just a father. He wasn't even just a doctor. He had become the voice of every patient who'd ever been ignored, every parent who had begged for help, every child who had been dismissed because of how they looked or where they came from, and Ethan, still clutching his inhaler, still pale but alive, became their symbol. Reporters began to gather outside the hospital within the hour. News vans parked crooked across sidewalks, cameras set up under buzzing street lamps. The words, "breaking story," flashing red across screens in living rooms nationwide. Inside, nurses whispered nervously. Doctors peeked out from behind curtains. Everyone knew they were living inside the kind of moment that would be dissected in classrooms, lawsuits, and documentaries. Linda tried to shrink into the corner, her phone buzzing in her own pocket. Texts from colleagues, supervisors, maybe even family, but she couldn't look. She knew what they said. She knew what she had become. Daniel's phone rang too, but he ignored it. He didn't need calls from administrators or PR teams. Not tonight. Tonight was about Ethan, about truth. Ethan coughed weakly, the sound brittle but real. "Dad, are they all watching me?" Daniel crouched beside him, lowering his voice, but the microphone still caught the words. "Yes, son. They're watching, and they're learning." A tear slid down Ethan's cheek, not just from fear, but from the strange weight of knowing his private struggle was now a public reckoning. He was only 15. He never asked to be a symbol. But fate rarely asks permission. On the live stream, the viewer count ticked higher. 150,000, 200,000, then 500,000. Let him breathe wasn't just trending. It was a movement. By midnight, the hospital was no longer a sanctuary of healing. It was a battlefield. Satellite trucks clogged the entrance, their masts stabbing into the dark sky like metallic trees. Reporters swarmed the sliding doors, microphones thrust at anyone in scrubs. Security guards locked down the lobby, trying to keep order as flashes popped like lightning. Central Hospital, Daniel Carter's pride. His life's work had become the epicenter of a storm no one could contain. Inside, administrators huddled in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor. The room was sleek, sterile, with polished wood tables and framed mission statements lining the walls. But tonight, the polished veneer cracked under pressure. The hospital's CEO, Margaret Sloan, was pale, her pearl necklace trembling slightly against her chest as she fiddled with it. Around her sat legal counsel, the head of PR, and a handful of department chiefs who looked like deer caught in headlights. On the wall screen, the live stream replayed in brutal clarity. Linda's sneer, Ethan's gasps, Daniel's icy command. The subtitles had already been added by some anonymous online crusader. "This isn't protocol. This is prejudice." The legal counsel cleared his throat. "We're facing catastrophic liability. EMTALA violation, ADA violation, child endangerment. If this goes federal, and it will, we're talking multi-million-dollar damages, possibly criminal." Margaret pressed her fingers to her temples. "We need to contain this now." The PR director, a young man in a navy suit, shook his head. "It's too late. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they've all cut into programming. Hashtag let him breathe is the #1 trend worldwide. This isn't containable. This is viral wildfire. And then, the door opened. Daniel Carter stepped in, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. Still in his coat, his son resting safely in a recovery room downstairs, he had traded tenderness for steel. His eyes swept the table, and every executive flinched as though he'd already passed judgment. "Dr. Carter," Margaret began, forcing a thin smile. "We were just, spare me," Daniel said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Your nurse nearly killed my son, on my watch. In my hospital, and the entire country watched her do it." No one breathed. Daniel placed both hands on the file table, leaning forward, his voice low but lethal. "You have a decision to make, right now. Are you going to fight this? Or are you going to face it?" The legal counsel sputtered, "Dr. Carter, with respect, With respect?" Daniel's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You think respect has anything to do with this? Respect would have been listening to a 15-year-old boy beg for air. Respect would have been trusting a medical bracelet instead of spitting on it. Respect would have been compassion." The PR director's phone buzzed violently. He glanced at the screen, face blanching. "It's the governor's office. They want a statement within the hour." Margaret's pearl necklace stilled as she exhaled, finally letting the truth sink in. "What do you suggest, Dr. Carter?" Daniel straightened, every inch the commander he had become over decades of leading surgeries, units, and systems. "We don't spin this, we don't downplay it. We own it, publicly, transparently. You issue a statement before sunrise admitting failure. Announce immediate reforms, medical ID training, emergency access policies, zero tolerance for discrimination. And you fire Linda Morrison before the morning shift." The CEO's mouth opened, but Daniel's glare silenced her. "If you don't, I will. And when I do, you'll all be answering to Congress, not just the press." The room fell into stunned silence. Downstairs, in the waiting room, Ethan slept fitfully under his blanket. His friend Jeanne still held her phone, live streaming to nearly 700,000 people. She whispered into the mic, voice hoarse but burning with conviction. "He's not just fighting for his son. He's fighting for all of us." And the world listened. Linda Morrison sat alone in the tiny break room, fluorescent light buzzing overhead like an interrogation lamp. Her scrubs felt tighter than ever, her badge heavier than lead. The echoes of Daniel Carter's words still rang in her ears. "You weren't following protocol. You were following prejudice." 12 years. 12 years of night shifts, double shifts, missed holidays, back pain, overtime. She had told herself it meant something, that the uniform gave her purpose. But now, with a million eyes dissecting her sneer, her laughter, her dismissals, those 12 years felt like ash. Her phone buzzed on the counter, relentless. Texts from co-workers. "Turn on the news. They're talking about you. I'm sorry." With trembling hands, she swiped. The screen exploded with headlines. "Nurse refuses life-saving care. Viral video sparks national outrage. Hashtag let him breathe, reaches 1.2 million viewers. Dr. Carter's son almost died of negligence, hospital under fire." Linda's face was everywhere, paused in the worst expressions, captioned with her own words. "Fake jewelry. I know a faker when I see one. Means sprouted like weeds." One TikTok looped her sneer with the caption, "When you think prejudice is protocol." Another overlaid her voice with Darth Vader's breathing. She buried her face in her hands. Then came the knock. The door opened, and two figures entered. Margaret Sloan, the CEO, pearls gleaming under the harsh light. And beside her, a man in a gray suit carrying a folder thick with papers. Legal counsel. Linda stood quickly, words tumbling. "Please, I didn't mean he didn't look like." Margaret raised a hand, silencing her. "Sit." Linda sat, knees knocking. The lawyer dropped the folder on the table with a heavy thud. "We've been reviewing your record." Her throat closed. He flipped through the pages, his tone flat. 3 formal complaints of unprofessional conduct. 2 patients alleging discrimination, dismissed for lack of evidence. At the time, colleagues reporting hostile demeanor, snap judgments, lack of compassion. He looked up, eyes sharp. "Sound familiar?" Linda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Margaret's voice was low, cold, final. "You've put this hospital in the crosshairs of a national scandal. Dr. Carter has already demanded your termination. The board will convene tomorrow morning, but the outcome is clear." Linda shook her head violently. "No, you can't. I've given my life to this place," Margaret cut in. "And tonight you nearly took a life, a child's life. On live stream, in front of the world." The words landed like knives. Tears finally spilled down Linda's cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. I thought I was protecting the hospital. No, Margaret's eyes hardened. "You were protecting your ego, and now there's nothing left to protect you." The lawyer slid a form across the table. "Resignation, effective immediately." It will read "personal decision." That's the only mercy you're getting. Refuse, and it's termination for cause. Permanent blacklist, civil liability. Possibly criminal charges. Linda stared at the paper. Her hands shook as she picked up the pen. She wanted to scream, to blame Ethan's hoodie, his thrift store sneakers, his trembling voice that sounded too much like the addicts she'd seen 1,000 times before. But deep down, she knew. It wasn't the hoodie. It wasn't the sneakers. It was her. Her Prejudice had worn the uniform tonight. And the world had seen it, she signed. The pen scratched like a coffin nail. Margaret stood. "Leave your badge and keys." Linda unclipped the badge, laid it on the table. For 12 years, it had been her shield. Now it looked like a weapon she had misfired. When she walked out of the break room, security was waiting. Phones rose, cameras ready. She covered her face, but it didn't matter. Every flash captured her, every whisper recorded. The villain leaving the stage. Upstairs, Daniel Carter watched through the glass of the conference room. He didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in the ruin of another life, even one that had nearly destroyed his sons. But accountability wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel just. And as Linda Morrison disappeared into the night, the hospital braced for the storm that was only just beginning. By dawn, Ethan's story wasn't just Ethan's anymore. The boy lay in a quiet recovery room, and Ford dripping steadily into his arm, the faint hiss of oxygen the only sound breaking the silence. His chest rose and fell more evenly now, color returning to his cheeks, but his world had already changed forever. He had gone to bed as a patient. He had woken as a symbol. Outside, the storm raged. News anchors spoke his name like he was family. Ethan Carter, the 15-year-old whose allergic reaction nearly turned fatal. Reporters replayed the live-stream footage in endless loops, dissecting every moment. Commentators debated systemic bias in healthcare. Patients tweeted their own stories of neglect. Hashtags multiplied like sparks. Hashtag let him breathe. Hashtag healthcare for all. Hashtag justice for Ethan. Even celebrities chimed in. A pop star tweeted, "Unreal." A child begged for help and was ignored. "This can't keep happening. Hashtag let him breathe." The post had 2 million likes by breakfast. But inside the hospital, for Ethan, it was still just the simple rhythm of breath. Precious, fragile, miraculous. His father sat at his bedside, dark circles under his eyes, but his hand never leaving his son's. Daniel Carter was a man used to shouldering responsibility, used to commanding ORS and boardrooms, but here he was only a father watching his child sleep. Every wheeze, every cough felt like a knife. When Ethan stirred, his eyes heavy but open, Daniel leaned closer. "How do you feel?" "Like everyone's watching me," Ethan whispered, his voice raw. Daniel exhaled. his thumb brushing against his son's hand. They are, but not just to watch, to learn, to change. A soft knock came at the door. It was Jeanne, the teenager who had live-streamed the entire ordeal. She held her phone close to her chest, eyes red from lack of sleep. "Can I come in?" Ethan managed a faint smile. "Yeah." She stepped inside, hesitating before blurting, "Your video's at 15 million views." Ethan's eyebrows lifted weakly. 15 million, Jen said, her voice cracking. "People are calling you a hero." Ethan looked down at his blanket, shaking his head. "I didn't do anything. I just couldn't breathe." Jean's voice grew stronger. "Exactly." And the whole world saw what it means when someone can't breathe, and people stand by. They're not just talking about you, they're talking about every patient who's ever been ignored. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You did something extraordinary, Jeanne. You shined a light where most people would have stayed silent." She flushed, biting her lip. "I just couldn't watch him die." For a moment, the room was quiet again, three people connected not by choice, but by crisis, bound together by truth. Then Daniel's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He answered, listening carefully before nodding. "Yes, we'll be there." He hung up, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Congress wants to hear your story." Ethan blinked. "Congress?" Daniel nodded. "They're opening hearings on healthcare discrimination. They want you to testify. They want the world to see your face, to hear your voice." Ethan's heart pounded. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't a leader. He was just a kid who loved sketching designs, who dreamed of building airplanes one day. But maybe, just maybe, his voice could build something bigger, now something that would outlast even airplanes. Outside the hospital, protesters began to gather, holding signs, "Patients deserve compassion, and no more prejudice in healthcare." Cars honked in support, chants rose in the morning light, and cameras caught every frame. The world was no longer just outraged. It was mobilizing. Linda Morrison's name had already become a case study in every newsroom. But the story was no longer about her. It was about Ethan, about how one boy's pain had cracked open the truth about a system. Later that afternoon, when Ethan sat up in bed for the first time, Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, what happened to you will protect thousands of others. Your suffering is going to mean something." Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time since that cookie, since the choking and the gasps and the humiliation, he let himself believe it. He looked at his father, at Jeanne, at the quiet world that had suddenly become so loud. "Then I'll keep breathing," he said softly. "For them." And with that, the boy who nearly lost his breath gave the country a new voice. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beep of the monitor. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across Ethan's bed. He blinked. Against the brightness, his body still heavy from the ordeal, his throat raw. But the weight pressing on his chest was no longer the allergy dot, it was the world. On the small television mounted on the wall, his own face stared back at him, his pale, gasping face frozen mid-attack, replayed again and again, as anchors dissected every second of the video. Ethan turned his head away, squeezing his eyes shut. He didn't want to see it. He didn't want to be that boy, but he was. His father sat in the chair by the bed, scrolling through his phone. The screen glowed with news alerts, messages, endless requests for interviews. Daniel's face was carved in fatigue, his shoulders heavy. Yet his hand still rested lightly on the bedrail, tethering himself to his son. "Morning," Ethan croaked, his voice cracked.